Hey MCU fans, I am bored now, and on this video I'm going to be talking about the first episode of the new Disney Plus Marvel show. It is called Hawkeye, so full spoilers from the start of this review. The first episode is called Never Meet Your Heroes, and do you know what? There's something to be said for that. So before I get started, this review goes out to one of my regular followers, Ton. So thanks for listening, Ton. And I know she's into a Marvel Cinematic Universe and has an interest in these things. So I decided to give her a shout out. Thanks for supporting the channel, Ton. So yeah, full spoilers. And just to give the setup a little bit, this is quite a eagerly anticipated spin-off series. So Hawkeye, Jeremy Renner, of course, returns from the Avengers movie, so now with his own TV show, although he's kind of sharing like top billing with the Kate Bishop character here, played by Hailee Steinfeld, who's making her debut as part of the MCU in this TV show. And certainly based on this first episode, she gets like the lion's share of the screen time. Now I'm guessing that's maybe going to change as we get more into their sort of connection, their relationship, and them working together as a team, which I think is where we're heading at the end of this episode anyway. But yeah, I think what they did, and it's a smart move really, is because Hawkeye's already an established character from the movies, it made sense to actually give some backstory and a bit more screen time to Kate Bishop, to Hailee Steinfeld's character. So just to say, this episode has a bit of a Christmas feel. I'm not sure if the whole thing's going to be set on Christmas or over the Christmas period, but it's the first episode is, and that's because Hawkeye, I forget his real name actually, but Renner's character, still picking up the pieces from what happened at the end of the Avengers, what happened with Black Widow, and he's sort of in New York with his kids, and we first sort of find him, of all things, at a Marvel musical, which is this sort of, upbeat, cheery musical version of the events of Marvel Endgame and what happened with that war. And I guess it's this sort of like comedy beat that you've seen before in these kinds of shows, but I think what this episode does, and where we find Hawkeye, is then he's in a place of very much a somber place where he's trying to escape his past. He feels very uneasy about being a celebrity, and he's the only one in the theatre not having a good time, not lapping things up. And at one point a little girl like turns around and like smiles, gives him a thumbs up, and he's just a very uncomfortable celebrity. And later on, someone like a dad in the bathroom wants a selfie with him for like his kid, and Hawkeye just wants nothing of it. And so he's there with his kids, and the idea is that they're going to meet up with the mother, played by Linda Curladini, who's a really fine actress, a bit later on. But then events sort of take a turn, because the bulk of the story, as I said, is with Kate Bishop and what transpires with her, and which Hawkeye sees on the news, so he's obviously going to find a reason to stick around. But yeah, it does have a very Christmas festive sort of feel, this one. So jumping to her side of the plot, which is the main plot of this episode, is we actually start with a really nice little setup scene, which is sort of set around the time of the big like civil war with the Avengers and their sort of enemies. And it's a young Kate Bishop, with her parents in their apartment. Her mum played by Vera Farmiga, so nice to see more of Vera Farmiga. Always great to see her. And one thing this episode does well is, like this opening scene, is it establishes that Kate's a little closer to her dad. And I mean, that could be maybe because she's quite a, not a typically like girly girl. It's sort of into her like action and sports and is quite athletic, but she's sort of closer to the dad for whatever reason. And we see a nice little scene where the mum's trying to show her that, hey, I can be cool as well. Vera Farmiga is just great in this, but it actually makes sense, and they establish that, because what then happens is then, with all this war going on outside, all this like, sort of fighting and battling, the side of their like building, because they're in like a big sort of skyscraper, that sort of collapses, and in all the commotion, the dad is killed, but Vera Farmiga, the mother, escapes with Kate, and there's a great line before we cut to the credits, which is Kate saying, "Yeah, I need a bow and arrow," which is an intro to her character where she like specializes in archery sort of thing. And so it's a good opening scene to establish what sort of character Kate Bishop is from a very young age, because I think that really establishes that she has this interest in being a superhero, in like fighting the forces of evil, and a clear motivation for this is because of what happens in that opening scene, what happens to her father. And it's like from a very early age she clearly has this drive. And we cut to, later on now, her as a teenager or a young adult, and very different sort of circumstances. We find out she learned martial arts at 15. And this is obviously where we see Hailee Steinfeld for the first time. And there's a funny, sort of quirky little scene where, as part of a bet, she wants to prove to her friends that she can like damage the sort of clock tower, the bell on the clock tower, as part of a bet, like with some friends. It's like at the college that they go to, and it's sort of this funny little thing where at first like the bow just like bounces off, and then the second time, not only does it hit it, but it does a lot of damage. And we just see that she has this sort of force and power behind her. And it becomes a whole thing later on where, like, the mother, because part of the thing about, like, their family is that they do come from wealth and they're pretty well off. So the mother sort of has to try and pay for the damage to the clock tower, which she, like, admonishes Kate for later on. And the way the plot of the episode goes is then the mother is like going to a fundraiser, which she talks Kate into going with her, and it's sort of sprung Kate like accidentally. Then her mother has got like married or got engaged, I should say, to this other guy who she spends a lot of time like working with, and he's clearly someone that Kate doesn't trust. So when she like overhears this detail, she hears it from this character played by Simon Callow, who, 4 weddings, bunch of stuff was involved with Downton Abbey, I think, but he has a small cameo in this episode as this rich sort of like socialite who has some sort of like friction going on with the mother, with Vera Farmiga's character. But anyway, yeah, that's how Kate finds out through him. and obviously there's a thing there where the mother's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean you to hear that, but like this. But I think what's cool about that is it establishes that Kate Bishop doesn't trust this guy, and as the episode goes on, it starts to look like she had a good reason not to trust him, because she like follows them through, like, and she sort of like spies on like this weird sort of secret auction where they're sort of auctioning off like objects, like artifacts that were involved that with the Avengers from the big war, like a sword, there's like a special watch, that kind of thing. And we see then the Simon Cowell character or Callow, I should say. Let's not get those two confused. The Simon Callow character and the one who's engaged to Vera Farmiga's character, they're actually having this bidding war for all these different objects. And there's a nice bit of comedy involved in the scene, because Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop is like spying on them, and at one point she pretends to be like a waitress, which again is a funny little term, because she keeps getting confused by the waitress as a waitress earlier, but then she sort of has to use that as a cover, and like a waiter comes along. It's like, excuse me, who are you? What are you doing here? And she says, oh, I'm a waitress. And he's like, well, I thought I was the only one on duty for this. And she sort of like shames him, says, well, no, Gary hired me, and you know, if you really want to disturb him, then that's your decision, sort of thing. So that's her way of getting out of it. But then there's a term where a guy comes along and is like, well, who are you? And it's like, well, talk to Gary. And he's like, well, I am Gary. And she's like, oh, I see. Because he's saying, what's your name? And then she's like, well, that's the problem, Gary. You don't know my name. I've been working here all this time, and it's not going to work out. I quit. And that's her way of like trying to back out. But as I said, she's spying on this auction, and it's a really well directed scene. Actually, it's quite sort of quirky, but there's obviously a bit of intrigue as well to what's actually going on with this auction and with these sort of two characters. And at one point, like these robbers come like bursting through the wall, and I think we're meant to assume they're just there to try and get their hands on like these sort of really prestigious like sort of artifacts, but they cause a distraction, which at one point the fiance, you know, Nick's like, I think it's the sword he gets his hands on, but they cause a commotion, and this leads to Kate actually sort of getting her first proper action as Kate Bishop, as the superhero, because she actually finds this random costume, puts it on, and you know, kicks a bit of butt. You know, she puts some of her martial arts to the test, and you get what I thought at least was a nice choreographed type sequence, and there's some good use of like wine bottles like thrown back and forth between it. Visually it's a fun little scene, and it's quite visual, but it's also quite playful as well. So I did like that sequence. And where this leads is then when she escapes later on, and she's got like this hood and this outfit, it turns out like, and I'm assuming these must have come from the audition, like this sort of outfit. So it turns out she looks like this villain, this sort of henchman called Ren. And the twist there is that it's a character who Hawkeye killed. We see that in a flashback, so that So then what happens is later on Hawkeye sees this on TV, and that's what gets his attention. It's like, well, okay, I killed Ren, so what's going on here? And that leads to the end of the episode. The Simon Cowell character also turns up dead later on, but it leads to the end of the episode where Hawkeye bumps into, well, tracks her down basically, like, and finds the one who they think is Ren. But obviously Kate Bishop's like, who are you? And that's the end of the episode. So you've probably guessed by what I've been saying, and I did enjoy this one. I thought it was an enjoyably solid first episode. I think Hayley Steinfeld is great. I always enjoy her. I think she brings the right level of like enthusiasm to the role, and she sort of looks the part. She's very athletic, but I think also she's like grounded and feels like an everyday girl next door type. I think if you see her in a film like Bumblebee, she clearly has that sort of appeal in that role, and she's just very likeable, and she's not too glamorous, and I think that's what you want for this part. Someone who, okay, they've got a decent, nice look, but not too glamorous. Someone who feels like an everyday sort of gal, and I think there's some good character building in this. I really enjoyed the back and forth with her and Vera Farmiga as the mother. I think they had some good chemistry as a mother and daughter, and I sort of appreciated that it took its time getting to know the character, and there's some nice musical moments, and I think there was stuff going on, and at times maybe a little too much if I was to say something, but no, it's good first episode. I thought it was enjoyable. It was nothing amazing, nothing like earth-shattering, but for all it was, I thought it was a good start, and it did entice me into seeing more, so I will see more. I'll be back with a review of episode 2 coming up pretty soon. There was some good music as well, as I said, so worth checking out in my opinion. That's the first episode of Disney's Plus new Marvel show, which is called Hawkeye. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. Share me out on social media, and ding that bell on YouTube for notifications when I go live or when I post a new video. And just to remind you, you can now support me on Patreon. That's right, patreon.com. Board now is this the Patreon address? I'm pretty sure that's it, but that's how you can support me if you look for me on Patreon, and you can support the channel for just $1. But I'll be back with more Hawkeye soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.